Welcome to the New Student, New Parent webinar. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Samantha Coates and I'm the author and creator of Blitz Books, music education products. And that covers theory and sight reading and rote repertoire. But we're not going to talk about any of that this morning. This morning is all about how to create successful studio relationships and how to welcome new students and feel that we're comfortable implementing our studio policies. Now, I am very, very lucky to have the wonderful Beth Horton helping me this morning. Thank you so much, Beth. She is going to be keeping an eye on all your wonderful questions and comments in the chat. And I encourage you to use the chat. Please do, because we'll keep an eye on it and hopefully we're going to try and address everything today. Now, I would like to start off with a story. I'm going to tell you a story about the time I took my 7-year-old daughter to her first ballet concert. Now, this was about 15 years ago because she's 22 now. So I took her, it was her one and only ballet concert. We hadn't been doing ballet for that long. So we arrived a couple of minutes late. Oh, well, it was only ballet, right? She wasn't in costume. Her hair was wind blown. I hadn't packed her accessories. I clearly hadn't read the note, right? I hadn't read the note. And all the other ballet mums were horrified that how could I drop her off without her hair already in a perfect bun? And I realized, oh my gosh, I was that parent. And in contrast, that would never have happened for any of my kids' music activities. We always arrived early, at least 15 minutes. We arrived with all the right music, all the right equipment, at just the right time and dressed appropriately, because music was a very important part of our family culture. But ballet wasn't a very important part of our family culture. And I think that this is what we need to find out as studio teachers. When we first interview a new student, it's so important to find out where music ranks in importance, because it will affect everything. So just like I didn't read the note and was very casual about my daughter's ballet concert, I realized that when my students turn up late or not dressed appropriately or don't have their music for my end of year studio concert, that's because that was me. That was me at the ballet concert and that's them at the music concert. So if we can find this out, it's going to help so much, because as long as everybody's on the same page, we can manage expectations and we know about how piano ranks in importance to each and every one of them, then it will help us with our studio relationships, because it affects every part of it. It affects whether they pay their bills on time. It affects whether they respect your policy. And we are going to be talking so much about policy this morning, because as part of the sign up form, we asked you to answer some questions. And Beth is going to actually show us now the results of these, the results of the survey. So Beth, would you like to take us through this?
Oh, sure. So we had an astounding amount of people select makeup lessons as a major pain point for themselves in terms of their studio, and introducing and speaking with parents and students and getting them involved in their studio culture. Next largest was that studio policy, just in general, payment, scheduling, and makeup lessons is a big part of that, I'm sure. Charging enough was next at 21.6%. Building rapport was the smallest amount, but still an issue or a concern for some at 5%. And then other was 13%. And Samantha will address some of those other comments that we received on that sign up process later on.
Thank you, Beth. So that is that's pretty astounding that so many people, I mean, if you put the makeup lessons and the implementing studio policy into the same basket, then that's over 50%. That is what people are basically saying was the most pressing issue in their studio. And then so many people said that they weren't charging enough. Now, I think that, as piano teachers, probably none of us will ever charge enough. We can never really charge what we're worth because we're not charging corporates, we're charging families. We do so much more training than doctors and lawyers, but anyway, that's probably a topic for another webinar. But given the feedback that we've had, this session is going to be split into 4 sections. So the first section, we're going to be talking about first contact. So the process of gathering information. And then the next section, we're going to talk about the trial lesson, how I get to the trial lesson and how I discuss policy with students in the trial lesson. And the next section, we're going to talk about policy, making it work for you. There's going to be no judgment. Whatever your policy is fine as long as it's working for you, and how to get parents on board with it. And then finally, we're going to talk about ongoing communication with parents and with students and developing rapport with students. If you have any questions or comments, please do put them in the chat. I know that you already gave some feedback through the sign-up forms, and I'd like to thank you for doing that. It was really, really useful. But it's really fun to see what people are thinking, and I think the chat can be really, really useful. All right, so let's talk about the first contact that I have with potential new students. And before I start, I would like to say that I realize I am coming from a position of privilege. And that is that I realize that in my independent private studio, I get quite a few inquiries, and I'm able to kind of put people on a waiting list and choose my students. That I'm in a very lucky and privileged position. If you are a peripatetic teacher in a school, you don't have that ability to choose your students, and that makes it much harder. And you may not even have control over the policy that you're able to implement. That also makes it harder. But today we're mostly going to be talking from the point of view of someone who's running their own business at home, an independent studio, whether it's piano or any instrument. And I'll tell you how it works for me, and I'm really hoping it's helpful for you. So the first thing that would usually happen is that I get a phone call or an email. But if it's a phone call, often the very first question is, hello, I'm looking for a piano teacher. How much do you charge? That's often the first question. Do you get that? Hands up if you often get that as the first question. Okay, so what I try to do is not answer that question. I deflect it. I don't say my fee. Just like if you went into a car showroom and the first thing you said was, how much is that car? The car salesman would never tell you. They'd start telling you about all the features of the car, and what about that car? Which is like, no, the features of that car. So when someone calls up and says, I need a piano teacher, how much do you charge? I say, oh, well, who are the lessons for? Is it for yourself or is it for your child? Oh, it's for my child. Oh, how old is your child? And I try to start a discussion about who the lesson is for. So I deflect the fee. And then I encourage them to put it all into an email, because I say, look, it's easier if we can, if I can email you some information. So that's the first contact. If it is an email, it's very easy to respond. Then when I do send them an email, I send them my teaching philosophy, not my policy, my philosophy. I've prepared a document that talks about me and how I like to teach, and that's got my fee in it, so they can read that. And if they find it appalling, then they probably won't email me back. Then the next thing is, in that same email, I say, if you would like to be on my waiting list, oh, that's right, I should say, my default position is, when someone calls me and asks for lessons, I say, look, I'm full at the moment, but there's always movement. I might have 10 spots available, but I always say, I'm actually full at the moment, however, there's always movement. Because I don't know if I want to take this student on. I don't want to say, oh yes, I've got Wednesdays at 4 o'clock. I'm always filtering. I send them a questionnaire, and I'm going to show you this questionnaire now, because this is a way to gather a lot of very, very valuable info. So here we go. Hopefully you will be able to see this. Okay. So this is the questionnaire that I send potential new students. So the first thing they answer is how, are you an absolute beginner or some experience, or basically a transfer student? So they answer that. Next, this is pretty basic. Child's name, age, year of school. If they are an adult student inquiry, I still ask them to complete this questionnaire, and I say, obviously, that the language is geared at a child, but please answer it for yourself. Then this question, do you have a piano or keyboard in your home? Please describe the instrument and its location. Now, how many of you have had disasters where you find out they don't have an instrument, or it's a toy keyboard under the bed? These things happen. It's very important. It's a deal breaker for me if they don't have an instrument yet. That may not be the case for some of you, but it's very difficult for them to have any sort of good feeling about piano lessons if they don't have an instrument at home. Then this question, if transferring from another teacher, can you describe the reasons? This is sometimes something that they are reticent to answer, but at least they'll say something. Now, this is a good one. How many practices per week do you think your child could fit in? I'm really wanting at least that 4 to 5 practices. 4 to 5. That's a great answer. 6 to 7 is amazing. 4 to 5 is good. If they tick the 1 to 3, that sets off red flags for me. And if they say just whenever the general routine allows, that's also red flags. That's when practice is basically never going to take place if they tick that one, because the routine usually means that it doesn't allow it. Have you had any musical experience yourself, the parent? Sometimes you get very short answers. No, sometimes you get very long answers of all the grades they did. Now, this is something that is very telling. In your opinion, how much does the rapport with the teacher affect progress? And so if the parent says anything like 3 or below, no effect, or if they don't think the rapport has an effect, then that means that they're not too concerned about how their child relates to the teacher. But this is something that's very, very important to me. And so I would like to think that they are more along the lines of, no, this is closer to a 10. What I really want is, I want my child to really get on with the teacher. So I would like it to be as important to the parent as it is to me. This next one's a quote that I've come up with. Oh, by the way, I'm going to send you a link so that you can make a copy of this questionnaire and use it for yourselves, because I find it so useful. It's just a wonderful way of gathering information, and you will get a copy of this. So then the next one, if children are not interested in practicing, this must mean they're not interested in learning the piano. And I'm really hoping that parents disagree with this. If they agree, then it needs some education. It means that their expectation is that their child will just naturally gravitate towards the instrument and practice diligently without needing support. But children don't do that. And it's great if the parents understand that. This next question is also very important to find out. Does your child engage in extracurricular activities? Please list them. My goodness, these answers are long. The kids have so many activities. They just do so much. The next question, do you have a weekly budget in mind? Now, I have sent them my philosophy by this stage. They know what my rate is, but often they haven't quite read it. And if their budget is way below what I charge, then in my email back to them, I will say, look, it looks as though my rate is outside your budget at the moment. You might want to look at finding a teacher that sits more in your budget. And that's sort of a polite way of doing it, but it's just good to find out where their expectations lie. This next one, I'm able to sit with my child when they practice. So no, I do not have time for this. Up to yes, I can assist with every practice. So, Suzuki requires a 10 here, a 10 out of 10. Yes, I can assist with every practice. I very rarely have parents clicking the 8 or the 9 or the 10. They're often sort of halfway. But this tells me a lot about how much support their child is going to get at home. Then I ask them, do you have any particular musical goals in mind? Again, this is sometimes a very long answer. And so when it's a very long answer, I sometimes feel like, oh my gosh, I'm under a lot of pressure here. This is going to be really tricky to teach this child. But sometimes the parent's like, no, I just want them to enjoy music. And that's a fantastic answer. Then, I want their name and their phone number. And then I do ask about vaccination. I realize this is a very, very personal, it's your personal choice whether you ask this, but I'm not saying in the questionnaire, are you vaccinated? I'm asking them to comment on it. If they decline to comment on it, then that might be an extra conversation that we need to have, but it is unfortunate. This is the way the world has gone, that I felt the need to include this in the questionnaire. But the Google form that we're sending you, completely editable. You can get rid of that question if you wish. And then I ask them if they have any questions for me. So that's it. So that's what I send out in that first email contact. Well, I guess it's second or third email contact really. So I say, look, unfortunately, I don't have any spots at the moment, but there's always movement. In the meantime, if you would like to be on my waiting list, would you mind filling out this form so I can keep in mind learn a bit about your child and your musical wants and needs? And they're usually very happy to fill it out. And then from that questionnaire, I can decide whether or not it's a good idea for us to have a trial lesson. Because if the feedback comes back from that questionnaire and I'm thinking, wow, this parent has very high expectations and very low support, I might not want to offer them a spot for a trial lesson. So if we get to the point of having a trial lesson, then usually it means that things are going quite well. I already have an idea that, yes, I think it would be really, really I think that will already be a great fit. Okay, so Beverly, just to clarify, yes, maybe that is in the first email back. So they've emailed me saying, hi, I need a piano teacher. How much do you charge? I emailed back saying, thanks so much for contacting me. I don't answer. I say, it depends who the lessons are for. Is it for yourself or your child? And then the next email exchange, they let me know. And then I send them, I've taken the liberty of sending you something, a little bit about how I teach. Attached is my philosophy. I don't have any room at the moment. Here's a link to the questionnaire. So I guess it's the second email. Okay, right. I also send them a couple of my blog posts to read. I send them one called How Much Should My Child Practice? And something about support at home so that they get an idea of where I'm coming from. All right, so now let's talk about the trial lesson. Now, I'm not going to go exactly into the content of how I run the trial lesson because that would be another webinar's worth. There's no time to cover that. But what I want to discuss is the point that I run a trial lesson, and I'd like to say that I will tell you that my trial lessons are not free. I know that some people do offer free trial lessons, and that's absolutely great. I've decided that for me, I don't offer free ones. When people say, oh, when I tell them the fee for the trial lesson, then they say, do we have to pay? It's just a trial. And I say, yes, it is still a valid and valuable lesson, even if you decide not to continue. So that's just what I choose to do. Now, in the trial lesson, the most important thing is we need to find out what they know. Even absolute beginners will have some concept of music. Someone might have taught them how to play something on the piano. There'll be music they like, music they don't like. They'll have musical tastes. We want to find out what they know and what they can already do. And certainly with transfer students, we want to find out what they know and what they already do. The two main things that need to be addressed in the trial lesson are practice expectations, and if they are transfer students and they've turned up with a folder full of photocopies, then we need to talk about copyright. Hands up if you've had that happen to you, a transfer student coming along with a folder full of photocopies. All right, and this can be quite awkward. So I always say, look, as an author and a publisher, I'm particularly sensitive to this issue, but it is very important that we pay for music unless it's in the public domain. And these photocopies that you have are actually not legal. So your previous teacher It's not a matter of the previous teacher being generous. They'll think of the previous teacher as being generous. The previous teacher was not generous. The previous teacher was unethical by providing these photocopies. So I introduce in the trial lesson, I make sure I say that it's very important to have a resource budget per term. Anyway, I've got blog posts about that too that I can send you. But what I really want to find out is what the practice expectations are and how much support we're going to get from the parent. The parent is the scheduler, and the parent is the one that we must get on board. Now we had Tara and Mary in their feedback forms who both said, how do we get parents to understand that home practice is so much part of the deal? And we're going to talk about this now and I should say also that when I run my trial lesson, I insist that the parent comes too. I would never run a trial lesson just with the child, because really the trial lesson is for me to meet the parent. It is, and I make that very clear in the email follow-up with the trial lesson. So, okay, I can confirm we're having a trial lesson at X time. It is both an opportunity for me to meet your child, but also for you and I to chat. It's very important that parent comes. Really, I'm interviewing the parent, not the child. Like, it's the parent that I'm taking into my studio, even more so than the child. And I have to say, I'll teach any child. If the parent is supportive, it will work. It will work. So I don't think I've ever had a trial lesson with a supportive parent and felt like, oh no, this isn't going to work in my studio. Okay, so I'm going to show you now a document that I always show to parents in the trial lesson, and it really makes them think about practice. So I have a matrix printed out, and it's got 4 options on the matrix. So the first option is this one. If they have support at home and they practice a lot, they will make the fastest possible progress. If they have a support at home but they don't practice much, there will be slow progress. If they don't have any support at home and they do practice, this is quite unusual, they'll make okay progress. And if they don't have any support and they don't do any practice, they will have no progress. So this is not rocket science, obviously. Now I show these 4 options to the child and the parent, and then I explain and I say, look, practice basically means 4 to 5 times a week or more. No practice is when you're just trying to do it ad hoc, or max. If it's 3 or less, that we're going to count that as no practice. And support is not that the parent is sitting with them every time, and the parent doesn't have to know anything about music, but the parent needs to have some idea of what has gone on in the lesson. The parent needs to at least be around and encourage the practice. So I ask them, which quadrant do you see yourselves in? Where do you see yourselves as a family? Do you, and so many of them say, oh, the yellow one. The yellow one. Yeah, we've got, the parent feels like they're going to be supportive, but we're very busy. And what that means is if we've got lots of support from the parents, but not much practice, basically they're the overscheduled children. They have so many activities, they don't have time to really develop the skills. Now, if they want to do exams, I say to them, you've got to be in the dark green quadrant. That is the only place to be if you want to do exams, or Eisteddfods or festivals or anything competitive. You need support and practice. And they can see, I say, I'm just wanting them to take responsibility for how much they practice. So Heidi, in her feedback form, said, what happens if they're so overscheduled they try to cram piano? And she said, is this a rapport issue if they're always wanting to cram? And I think that if you have a student who's not practicing, it's not to do with rapport. I don't think it's a rapport issue. I think it is a timetabling issue. I think it's the parent not acknowledging that the child doesn't have enough opportunities to practice, and that when the opportunities come up, that they're not realizing that they need to really support their child. And this is all the way through to teenagehood. I had to support my own children's practice until they were at least 13 or 14. They did not know how to practice by themselves. It was really, really tricky. Practice is difficult. It's a solitary thing. So in the trial lesson, we talk a lot about practice. And then once I've assessed all the skills, finally we talk, we say, look, how about, you go away and have a think about whether you liked this lesson, and let's follow up by email during the week. But also I'm having a think about it. But then we, if it looks like it is going to go ahead, here's the most important part of the trial. I talk about my policy at the end of the trial lesson. So, and then I say, look, I just need to let you know that my policy is not very flexible. I charge by the term, and there are no credits or makeups. And some people choose not to take the spot with me because they prefer a more flexible teacher. Now, this is a very powerful thing to say face to face to the parent, because they are going to have to agree verbally, and they've heard you say it. And this is so much better than sending out, I do send out a written policy as well, but nobody reads the terms and conditions. Nobody reads the policies. So by saying it to them and saying, look, if you are feeling like you want a more flexible teacher, if you feel like you need a teacher that can reschedule at the last minute because you have a lot of clashes with other activities, it's possible that I'm not the teacher for you. It's quite blunt. But usually at this point, we've had such a wonderful trial lesson and they're really on board that the parent's like, oh no, that'll be fine. Now they say, oh no, that'll be fine. They still push back later on. I'm not saying that this eliminates all disasters. We're going to talk about the disasters, but it is so important to have a verbal acknowledgement that you, of what your policy is. Now that's, of course, that's my policy, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. I can see that somebody has asked, do I charge the same dollars for trial lessons? Yes, I do. I charge my same rate. It's a 45-minute trial lesson. Really, I can't get to know everything in 45 minutes. It's essentially to meet the parent and get to know the child a little bit, check if we might be a good fit. But I often say to the parent, look, we're going to be getting to know each other over the next term. The progress might be faster or slower than you think, but there's going to be some settling in time. Okay, so that's the trial lesson. Now, my policy. Let's talk about my policy evolution. And I would like to show you now what my policy used to be. So we have got a scale of 1 to 10. All right, so I used to have this policy here. Very flexible. In fact, I would say I had no policy. I remember I had a parent who would ring up at 5 to 4. This is like 36 years ago. I was a teenager. A parent would ring up at 5 to 4 for the 4 o'clock lesson and say, oh, we're not coming today. And I'd say, oh, okay. And I'd put the phone down and I'd think, oh, well, that's income I didn't get this week. And I'd be all forlorn. So that's basically no policy. That's not just flexible. Then I think I moved to around about here. 2 or 3, I started saying, oh, if you give me 24 hours notice, that's okay. What I'm going to ask you to do in a minute is, can you put a number in the chat of where you feel you are with your policy? Put a number in the chat. So very flexible or no policy up to very strict. For about 20 years, I was probably maybe this area. And then lately in the last 4 years, I've managed to get to here. I have a very strict policy and I feel that it works for me. So I would love you to put a number in the chat of where you think you are. But then I would also like you to put a number in the chat of where you'd like to be. And especially think about, or maybe you don't have to put it in the chat, but think about the number of where you'd like to be. Is that different from the number that you are? Because that's really what this is all about. If you are a 3, but you want to be a 10, we've got to figure out how to get there. Okay. Now, even though when I say 10, very strict, and I say that works for me, I am a compassionate person. Like, I do understand that things come up. I'm not saying that I enforce my policy without any exceptions, no way. But I'm good at implementing it. I feel like it's a really tight policy. So, so it used to be that people cancelled at the last minute. When I was a 1 or a 2, people cancelled at the last minute. There was no penalty. Then when I moved up to sort of a 3 or a 4, and I said 24 hours notice, people cancelled at the last minute, but then I had to ask for payment the next time. That's awkward. Then I started billing by the term, which means that I've got the money in advance, but people would still ask for credits or makeup lessons. And that's probably where the majority of us are at the moment, I would say. It used to be that I gave credits with more than 24 hours notice, but then I found that on weekends in particular, my Saturday students, so many of them would be away, and I really lost a lot of income on Saturdays by crediting with more than 24 hours notice. So I changed my policy to be very strict for Saturdays. And I was able to say to people, oh, well, if you want to take the Saturday spot, you need to be aware that the term fees apply no matter what, even if you're away. And so people would go, oh, we'll wait for a weekday spot then, or something like that. And then I realized that, oh, well, what about when students go away during term? They often take holidays during term because it's cheaper. And then I was losing income. So I thought, no, about three years ago, I changed to everybody. The everyday policy was the same as the Saturday policy, but I gave everybody a lot of notice. So if you're going to change, you have to give notice, and we'll talk about that some more. Now, and I think that now, since COVID, things have actually been better because of the online option. It's just so much easier to be able to say, oh, no problem, we'll have the lesson online. Now, I'm not talking about when they're really so ill that they can't even attend an online lesson. And I'm not talking about what happens when you, the teacher, are ill. This is very difficult in a big flu season and a big COVID season. It's very difficult to know to like, we lose income if we can't teach. There's kind of nothing that we can do about that. And I would like to say that this policy doesn't cover you if you are sick. No studio policy can cover you if you are sick. If you're charging for lessons that you don't give and parents are happy to pay, well, that's great, but that usually can't really happen. So I have basically in my policy, it's not about whether they miss a lesson, it's whether they don't attend the lesson. So I think it's not a missed lesson. The lesson I'm there to teach, I have a non-attendance policy now. If they are not attending, that's actually not my problem, because I am there to teach. If there is literally an emergency, that is a different story. But I would say 99% of the times I get an inquiry to reschedule a lesson or change a lesson, it's not due to illness. It is due to a clash with another activity. Would you agree with that? Can I have some nods if you would agree with that? So, and if they have a clash with another activity, seriously, that is where it's not your problem. Okay, so how can we implement policy more easily? I think we have to stop feeling guilty about it. If you feel guilty about implementing your policy, then that is where it makes you feel so uncomfortable that you don't want to do it. So I'm here to hopefully help you have ways to feel less uncomfortable. So we're going to start. I'm going to tell a little story. This is totally made up. This is fictional. I imagine that I have taken up a new hobby of knitting. Maybe I will do this one day. So imagine that I have a new knitting teacher and my knitting lesson is at 1 p.m. on Tuesdays. Now, a friend arrives from out of town and says, would you like to have lunch on Tuesday? I'm only here for a few hours. Can you come? So in scenario 1, my knitting teacher is so flexible. I know I can cancel at the last minute and I don't have to pay. So what do? I cancel my lesson and I go and have lunch with my friend. Now you can probably see where I'm going with this. If you have a very flexible policy and you make it easy for people to cancel without penalty, they will do it. They will absolutely do it. In scenario 2, however, I know that my knitting teacher has a no credits, no makeups policy. So now I have 3 options and I want you to think about which one of these would you be. Option 1 is Tell the friend, sorry, I can't do lunch. I have to go to my knitting lesson. Option 2 is I decide to forfeit my knitting lesson because I really want to see the friend. So that's an expensive lunch, but oh well. And scenario 3 is I could just call the knitting teacher just in case there's a chance of rescheduling. Can't hurt to ask, right? So I would say I would be option 3. Even though I know I've read the terms and conditions, I know that my knitting teacher has this strict policy, but it can't hurt to ask. Would you be a 3? Maybe hold up a 1, 2, or 3. Would you go cancel the lesson? Would you cancel the number 1 is you cancel the lunch. Number 2 is you cancel the lesson. You forfeit the lesson. Number 3 is it can't hurt to ask. Okay, interesting. All right, so we're very mixed. Now, but there are some 3s. And I realize that I'm actually in the number 3 camp. And this has made me feel a bit better when parents ring me and ask. I don't get so mortified and say, what? They've read my policy. How can they ask? I just think, hey, they're just asking, and it's okay for me to politely say, oh no, sorry, that's not possible, because they already know. All right, so I think that there are quite a few people who ask, and I certainly with parents, I have found that they ask. So here's a bell curve of where I think the parents of my students fall. So there are the outliers either side, where we have the parents who will say, I'm not coming and I demand a credit. Very few of those. Then there's the outliers on the other side who will just forfeit the lesson and say, of course I'll pay. These are actually in the minority, but the vast majority will say, is there any chance of rescheduling? So this is where it gets tricky for us, because we have to constantly reinforce. We're always repeating ourselves, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And it's hard, it's uncomfortable, I acknowledge that. So this is where we have to figure out what works for you. So now we're going to have another matrix, and you can see which quadrant you fall in. And there's deliberately no colors here. There's absolutely no judgment here. Whatever, it's just as long as it works for you. So we have either you have a strict or a flexible policy. Let's polarize it. Let's say you give makeup lessons. Flexible is you give makeup lessons all the time, and strict is no, you don't. And this will either work for you or not work for you. So if you're very strict and it works for you, and this is the way I feel, then that's satisfactory. I really feel, even though I do have to repeat myself, and even though I feel uncomfortable from time to time, I really feel it works for me, my work-life balance. I teach in my teaching times, I don't teach in my personal times, and it works. Now, if you have a strict policy, but you really feel very guilty, this is uncomfortable. This means it doesn't work for you. You're trying very hard, but you're just finding it too uncomfortable. So maybe you don't want to keep that strict policy, and that's absolutely fine. Maybe you prefer to be more flexible. Now, if you have a flexible policy and it's working for you, then that's fine. This is simply more time consuming. Without a doubt, it's more time consuming, because if you are not only teaching in the times that you've allocated to teach, and if you are making up lessons in your personal schedule, then it's taking you twice the time to get through those lessons. So that is time consuming, but that still might be okay for you. But this last quadrant here is if you are flexible and it doesn't work for you, then this is where it is exploitative. This is where parents are actually taking advantage of your goodwill, your lovely willingness to accommodate their requests, and you realize that it's eating up all your time. So we really need to talk about this quadrant. If you are flexible but it's not working for you, then how can we change that? Okay, so when I thought the 24 hours notice policy was working for me, it worked until there was one time where there were 3 families who contacted me in the holidays to say that they were going to be away for weeks 1 and 2 of term. And because in Australia, we teach basically 4 10-week terms a year with holiday breaks in between, and I bill by the term. So these 3 families were going to be away, and I taught 2 siblings from each family. So that's now 6 lessons that I wasn't giving for the first 2 weeks. That was a lot of income to lose. And they did the right thing. They gave me more than 24 hours notice. But I realized it wouldn't have mattered if they gave me a year's notice. I still can't afford to do that. I can't afford to do that. So that's when I decided no, they have to pay for lessons, even if they're going away. Families will often go away during term because it's cheaper. So if they are not paying for the lesson, then who should pay for the lesson? And I submit, it shouldn't be you. You should not be paying for the lesson. They should be paying for the lesson. So if they don't come and they don't pay, you are paying for the lesson, either by losing the income completely or having to find a separate time to make that up. So the problem is that it's by them going away, by people going away or going to another activity, they're essentially asking you to take unpaid leave, which we just can't afford to do. And it should be factored into the cost of their holiday. So, I mean, this is a very blunt way to say it, and I would never ever say this to a parent, but we should not be subsidizing their holidays by allowing them to not pay for the lessons that they're missing. And the crux of the matter is this: no one wants casual piano lessons. There is no such thing as being able to fill a spot for 1 week or 2 weeks. Hairdressing, sure, cancel your appointment, they can take a walk-in off the street. There's such a thing as casual appointments, but the nature of piano tuition is that there's no such thing as casual lessons. So we cannot fill those spots, and therefore they do need to be paid for. Now, that forced me into tightening up my policy. But I am a compassionate human being, and often there are exceptions. Now, what requires an exception where I will give a credit or a makeup lesson? Well, a last-minute emergency. Really something unforeseen. A sudden onset of illness, so ill they cannot even do an online lesson. Not sudden onset debating finals. Not last minute friend's birthday party. These are not emergencies. So it's you can choose. By having a stricter policy, what it means is you get to choose when you will relax it. And there's a saying, under promise and over deliver. So if you say, I don't give credits or makeups, but then you choose to do it occasionally for students where you can see it just totally was unforeseen, they're going to be much more grateful because they know it's not part of your policy. And you want to be appreciated for making this exception. You don't want it to be expected. All right, so Beth, have been any super duper questions that have come up that I need to respond to regarding the evolution of policy?
No, I haven't seen any really good policy questions or policy questions in general. Lots of comments about it. So lots of good, lively conversation. There's another question, but it regards waiting lists. So we'll circle back at the end for that one.
Yes. Okay. So if a car break, someone said a car breakdown is considered an emergency. If their car is broken down, they've got a phone on them. We just do a lesson over the phone. Like, this is where online steps in. There's very few situations where an offer of an online lesson can't solve everything. There's plenty of things that we can do even if they're not at the piano. So many things. So I can offer a really great lesson online even if they're not at the piano. There's oral things we can do, rhythmic things, we can talk about music, I can show them things on screen, I can quiz them. The parent gets the idea. Well, I want the parent to understand, I'm here ready to teach. Your last minute change of plan or getting stuck or running late doesn't change the fact that I'm here ready to teach, and I am able to teach you. But if they're, a really lovely long-term parent and there's an emergency and even a car breakdown and, we really couldn't salvage the lesson, then I might choose to credit that, but I usually make a big deal of it. I will say to that parent, look, I don't normally do this. I am going to make up that lesson in this one instance, but maybe just keep it to yourself. basically don't tell all your friends. I think if I'm going to do it, I'm just going to make them realize that I'm doing them a favor, because that is what we're doing. We're doing them a favor when we accommodate their schedule. Okay. So the next section we've talked about the trial lesson, we've talked about first contact, the trial lesson, and policy, and now we're going on to our final section.
One final question about
Ooh.
policy.
Oh, yes.
Oh, sorry. I just interrupted. I was rude. I'm sorry. One final question about policy. Christine wants to know about how much notice is a change in policy. How much notice do you generally give your family?
Oh, Christine, thank you. I meant to say that. So when I decided to change my Saturday policy, I gave everybody a termed notice, which was 3 months. When I decided to put everybody onto my strict, like the Saturday policy was going to apply every day, I gave everybody actually 5 months notice. I sent out the letter at the beginning of term 4, which is September, and said that this will apply for the following year, so the following February. That's a lot of notice to give. And I also encouraged them. I said, if you feel that this will not work for you, please give me a call. I didn't say call to discuss. I wasn't going to negotiate it, but I wanted them to acknowledge and to call me. I only had one parent call me, and she said, really? So, because we like to, our school breaks up, at the beginning of December, and we usually go overseas. And are you saying we still have to pay for those lessons? This is the reason her school breaks up early, is because they went to the most exclusive private school in Sydney, and she was worried that she didn't want to have to pay for lessons that she wasn't having, but the state school term was still going. So I said, yes, I teach by the state school term, so and I wouldn't be able to fill those spots, so yes, that's what's going to happen going forward. Then I said, I completely understand if this doesn't work for you and you'd prefer to find a teacher who can be more flexible. And she didn't go and find another teacher. She did stay with me, and she continued to push back the following year. I was always having to juggle with this particular parent. So I promise you that no one's without their disaster stories. But giving notice is essential. Acknowledging that you understand they may find it, you realize you're not as flexible as some other teachers, but it's really important. And the other thing I'd like to say is, if it wouldn't work to be incredibly flexible for every single student in your studio the same week, then just don't do it for anybody. If it doesn't work for all, then don't do it for any. Because there's always the same families that probably are asking and requesting and pushing back. And if your policy is this tight, people will push this boundary. If you expand your boundary to this much, people will ask for this much. If you expand to this much, people will ask for this much. So you may as well have a nice strict one to start off with, and you can decide how much you'd like to relax it for how many people. Okay, right, we're going to on the fourth and final section, which is all about ongoing communication with parents and also with students, aka sticking to your guns. This is probably the very hardest thing to do. It's all very well to have a lovely policy which you send out and parents agree. And by the way, I don't actually ask anybody to sign. I think it's fine if you ask them to sign something, but really the signature doesn't help you. I do get them to email. I email the policy as the final thing and say, just checking, can you please email me back to say that you're fine with all of this, you agree to it before we go ahead. So I do want a written acknowledgement. And a signature is fine, but it doesn't mean that there will be no pushback. Okay, so so many of us ticked about not charging enough. So I just want to take a moment to discuss increasing fees. If you are not charging enough and you would like to increase your fees, absolutely you should do so. I'm not going to talk about what fee is or isn't appropriate, but just the fact that we need to increase it. It's important to keep up with the times. You have to be able to, you're experiencing inflation just like everybody else. But how to communicate a change in fees is really important. Now, in 2019, I put my fees up a lot. And it was triggered by something. I realized I was undercharging a little bit. And what happened was in 2019, I turned 50 and I decided to give myself a little 50th birthday present of some personal training sessions. And when I looked around at the price for personal trainers, I was horrified to discover that they all charge more than me, including the 18-year-olds with no experience. Really? And it's like all the personal trainers charge the same. I couldn't find some like cheapy people down the road for like half the price. They were all really quite exorbitant. And I thought, boy, oh boy, I am not charging enough. So I decided I would put my fees up. So this is what I did. I wrote a letter to all my students saying, look, I feel that I have been undercharging for a while, and the going rate, some teachers are charging up to this much, and I've decided to put my rate up. So, and I put it up by more than 25%. But I wrote individual letters to each one of my students, and I said, I realize that this much of a rate hike would be prohibitive for you. So I'm only going to put your rate up by this much. And so my official rate increased a lot, but I then kept my long-term loyal students on a lower rate than that. Now, so what happened was they got a letter that said, whoa, the fees are going up. Oh, but my fee isn't going up as much as that. Like as in, oh, luckily my child, I don't have to pay as much. So the response that I got to me increasing my fees was, I got thank you letters. I got quite a lot of people saying, oh, that's very kind of you, thank you. Because they were saying, thank you for not putting our fee up as much as that. We appreciate it. But their fee still went up. If I'd have just sent out a letter saying, oh, the fees are increasing by this much, I don't think I would have had a very positive response. So that's my strategy, is that my official rate, I hardly have any students on my official rate, which is quite high. And I do allow for long-term student loyalty. And I do offer practice scholarships. So if people are working really hard, then they're going to get a discount off their bill because it makes my job easier. And if people ask, if people are, having hardship, obviously I'm compassionate and I can arrange a bursary or a discount for them for the term, but I do it in the form of a scholarship or a bursary, not reducing my rate, so that my rate is the same and then there's a percentage of that. But if you have an official rate that is quite a lot higher than the rate that you charge your students, that can work really well. Administratively, it does take more time because I can't just plug an amount in. I can't just automate it. And actually, I would like to say that all of these processes take more time. Even the whole onboarding thing that I was talking about before, I could see a couple of people were asking, how would we automate this process? I need a way to just, make it more automatic. And you can't really, because you're trying to screen people who are going to come to your home every week for several years. It is important to invest the time to make sure that you get the person that you want to get. And with managing fees, it can be more time consuming as well. Someone said, no, you can publish your rates on your website. Absolutely put your fees on your website if you want to. But I would say make that, the maximum rate. If that's going to turn people off, then don't put that on your website. The thing about how much you charge is that we are worth whatever the market will pay. We are all undercharging. There is no question that we do not get paid an amount commensurate with our skill and experience. And that's because of who we're charging. We're charging families. And we're charging them every week for years and years and years. These are not one-off expenses. So I'm lucky. I live in a demographic where I am able to charge quite a high rate. But I know I've had feedback from teachers like Susan who have moved to a different area and find that everyone else is charging below the rate. So it's very hard to charge a high rate if you're in competition with other teachers who charge a low rate. These are tricky things. But in terms of how you communicate a fee rise, I would recommend saying that I'm actually putting my fees up this much, but for you, I'm only going to put them up this much. And that can work. And as I said, it just takes a little bit more admin because you have to keep track of who's on what rate. Okay, and that also, I also gave everybody a huge notice period for the change in fees. It was probably 4 months notice. And then I remind them. There's constant reminders in newsletters. Okay, so general communication with parents. You have a new student, but you have a new parent. And the parent is actually your customer. The parent is the paying customer. And I was delighted to read that in Marie's feedback form, she said that the biggest issue for her was training new parents. And I just love the fact that she used the word training, because new parents in your studio, they're kind of like new puppies. They do need training. They're eager to please and they're lovely. And when they do the wrong thing, they don't always know. Perhaps the previous teacher was extremely flexible and it's just normal to them to cancel at the last minute and not have to pay. We have to educate parents and train them and teach them how we want to be treated so that we're not taken advantage of. So we've got to really be consistent. Okay, so the thing I would like to talk to you about the most is a blog post by Wendy Stevens. She has got some amazing advice on her blog about how to talk to parents. And when we send you the follow-up email, we'll send you links to these blogs. The first one is called The Secret on How to Enforce a No Makeup Lessons Policy. Now, doesn't that just encapsulate everything that we've been talking about this morning? I recommend you go and read this blog. It's fantastic. It's talking about the fact that you don't have to justify yourself when you don't give makeups, and you don't have to feel guilty. You need to have a teaching schedule, and that's when you teach. And outside of that is your personal schedule. And if you can't accommodate a student in your teaching schedule, you should not have to accommodate that student in your personal schedule. And you don't have to say why. You don't have to say, oh, it's just that Friday afternoons I usually try and spend time with my kids because it's the only day that they've got nothing on. No, you don't have to say any of that. You can just say, my schedule is full. And when they say, what about Friday afternoon? I'm so sorry, I'm not available. My schedule is full, I'm not available. These are two really important things to say with a smile on your face, but you don't have to say why. The next blog title I'd like to tell you about is the one that's called How Do I Actually Enforce a Piano Policy? And this applies to any instrument. So read that blog, it's fantastic. And some main points that she makes are that all the parents are adjusting if you're trying to enforce a new policy, or if you have a new sense of resolve that you're going to actually implement and enforce it. The parents need to get used to that. So give them notice. Give them at least a turn's notice, and you will be repeating yourself. Now, Jolene said this in her feedback form. She said, I just find that I'm constantly having to remind them. Yes, parents are busy. They have multiple children with multiple activities. Yes, you have to remind them. We will be repeating ourselves until we're blue in the face, but it's okay. We'll also have a smile and we'll also be firm, and that will work better. Okay, and then the next one is 7 rules for texting or emailing piano parents. And this is awesome. This is all about the tone. So Wendy Stevens says that a flat tone, so when you send a message, an email or a text that has either no punctuation or only full stops, that will be read as a negative tone. And I just want to show you a really funny example that she puts actually as part of the blog post. So it says, here's an example from an email or text that I wrote to my mum a long time ago. Hey mum, we're going out to eat next Thursday night and we haven't been out for a long time. We were wondering if you'd be willing to watch the kids. Here's the answer I received. Yes. Okay. So I could totally relate to this, because this is the type of answer I get from my mum as well. Now, Wendy Stevens goes on to say in the blog that she read that answer as, yes, I suppose so, if I must. But actually, it turns out that her mum didn't mean that at all. Her mum was like, yes, sure, I'll mind the kids. But because her mum didn't text back with any exclamation marks or emojis, it was read in a very flat tone. And so this is something we have to be very careful of when we are communicating with parents. So I want you to imagine that you have just received a text from a parent that says, hi, we're actually going to be away for the first 4 weeks of term 2. If you could please adjust the invoice for a week 5 start, that'd be great. Thanks. Whew. So that already fills me with dread, getting a text like that. I get them too, and I'm sure you get them. And it's a parent who comes across quite entitled, that, oh, sure, you're going to accommodate them. So here's an example of two possible ways that you might respond to this text. So the first one is the one I don't recommend. Sorry, according to my studio policy, there are no credits or makeups. That is the truth, but I do not recommend responding like this, because that's a very flat. That will be read like a slap on the hand. And you can already see, like, it sounds flat, and I read it out flat. But would you agree that doesn't look good? But sometimes we're very stressed, and that's what we send back first. Here's what I suggest would be a much, much better response. I'm so delighted you're going to have a lovely holiday. I'm not able to credit the lessons, but if you send me lots of recordings in advance, I will use the lesson times to listen to the recordings and write detailed feedback. Then we will be able to pick up easily once you're back. I hope you have a wonderful trip. Okay, so I probably could have put a smiley face in there as well, but definitely an acknowledgement of the excitement of their trip, exclamation mark, just very politely, no, I'm not able to do that, and then a have a lovely trip at the end. Now, this doesn't solve the problems, but it definitely sets the tone for a more successful ongoing relationship. And this is where online lessons and recordings have made such a difference, because the onus is on them to make the most of this lesson that they're choosing not to attend. I'm just going to say that again. The onus is on the parent, the student and the parent, to make the most of the lesson that they are not going to attend. You are pretty much still going to give the lesson. And it doesn't take a lot of time, because often they don't send the recordings in advance. But by you saying that, by saying, oh, no problem, just send the work in advance, and I will use so-and-so's lesson time to mark the paper or write feedback, it sends a clear message. You are still going to devote that time to that student, because that's how you've arranged your week. If they're choosing to be elsewhere, well, that's okay. They can choose to be elsewhere. But that doesn't mean that you should have to make up that lesson at another time. Okay, so now both Tara, a different Tara, and Sandra have said, what do we do about illnesses due to flu and COVID? It's been really, really tough this term, so many illnesses. So I have something that I personally called compassionate COVID credits, triple C's. I just put it in, I don't tell the parents that, I just have it in my document with them. Yep, they're eligible for a triple C. Because some parents have just been, it's one after the other, COVID, flu, and then it's been really hard for them. And so, sure, I mean, I have been crediting some, but they don't expect it. It's a bonus. If it's an abuse of goodwill, that's where it gets tricky. You don't want to be taken advantage of. And then Joanne asked, how do we get parents on board and reading the newsletter? I would like to tell you that this is my second term now of offering $10 off their invoice if they just email me back to say they've read my policy. It hasn't cost me anything. They just don't read it. These parents are so busy. I've even prompted them and said, oh, congratulations to those who took advantage of last term's bonus just for reading the newsletter, in bold, but no. They're too busy. Okay, so basically, this is what it comes down to: how compassionate you're going to be, and if you yourself are ill, that is very hard. I mean, there is such a thing as income protection insurance, but it would be prohibitively expensive even to have. You can't even claim until you've been ill for somewhere between 2 and 6 weeks. There would be an excess. It's so hard. If we're ill as teachers, we don't get paid. This is the problem with being self-employed, that there's no sick pay in our industry. So I guess the rate that we charge as our hourly rate when we are teaching has to allow for that. But it has been a really tough couple of years with illness. And if that has affected you a lot, my heart goes out to you. Okay, finally, communication with students and rapport. So the rapport with our students is so important, and that's a lot of people ticked that in the sign up form, developing rapport with students. So I just thought I'd tell you 3 sets of things that I say with my students. One is to do with icebreakers at the beginning of the lesson. One is to do with how we're going to run the lesson. And the final one is to do with how I approach pieces in a way to develop rapport. So I'm sure you all have things that you like to say to your students when they come in the door, but I like to say, tell me the best thing that's happened to you in the last 48 hours. And the younger ones go, oh, is that 2 days? It's really cute. And so they're really trying to think about what's the best thing that's happened. Or I ask them, what are your highlights and lowlights of the week? Because I want to know what was good and also what was bad if they want to tell me. So, and it's just good to learn about their little lives. I feel like we're in such a privileged position of being able to spend one-on-one time with these kids every week. It's not something they get really with many other people in their lives. So getting started, I say, well, would you like to start with a piece or a game? And sometimes we even get started by writing an agenda for the lesson. This works very well for autistic people, because my son is autistic and I know that it lowered his anxieties when he knew what was coming next in the lesson. So having a lesson plan that you've decided on together at the beginning, an agenda, works really, really well. And it actually works well with everybody, not just autistic children. And then I ask them, or I say, what did you enjoy practicing the most this week? And maybe we'll start with that. Or I'll ask them, which thing do you think improved the most this week? Now, when they come in and they say, I'm sorry, I haven't practiced much, I say, oh, and is much a euphemism for not at all? But it doesn't really bother me often if they haven't practiced. I quite like it. There's so many activities that we can get through that we don't have an opportunity to go through. What I never do is just run last week's lesson again. No, we're just going to start something new. We're not going to go over what we did last week. If they haven't had a chance to practice, we're just going to get onto new things. Now, regarding pieces, what we don't do, even if I say, what did you enjoy practicing the most, or what thing improved the most, I very rarely start the lesson with them just playing me a piece all the way through, which it was either Robert Duke or Richard Chronister in their books that referred to this as a performance episode. Don't start the lesson with a performance episode, because it's very stressful for the student. They feel like, oh, now I've got to perform and it's got to go well, everything that I did at home. I don't like to do that. So when they say which piece they want to start with, I say, now, were there any bits that you found particularly annoying? Because I want to zoom in straight to the problem areas of that piece. I don't want them to play it for me from the beginning. Unless we're specifically practicing for a performance, an upcoming performance, then we're going to say, okay, you're going to perform this now. I'm going to try to distract you, blah, 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 blah. There was a whole webinar. My last webinar was about that. So if you didn't get a chance to catch that, go and watch that. It was all about preparing your best performance. But in a lesson situation, I like to zoom in on the problem areas. So I say, were there any parts that really annoyed you this week? And they'll go, oh, yes, I couldn't get this bit. It's never the first few bars, by the way. Or, I say, let's go straight to the problem areas and let's see if I can help you fix them. Because I want the lesson to be all about problem solving. That's really what it is. Their time with me is about learning new things, but also about problem solving so that they can go home and do it themselves at home. And all of that goes towards rapport, because it relaxes them, makes them understand that they're not there to try and be perfect for me. And it gives the feeling that we're in it together. So I do feel as though I have a good rapport with my students, because I don't make them feel guilty if they haven't practiced. If that is an ongoing problem, I'll start to have a conversation with the parent. But usually we've done that whole matrix thing in the trial lesson, so I have an idea of what their lives are like. And then finally, with rapport, I use Tonara a lot. And Tonara is a virtual learning management system that you can have with students. And I do communicate with them quite a lot through Tonara, because there's this special little chat function, which is so great, because you don't want to give your students your mobile number. You don't want them texting you directly, but they can send messages in Tonara. And I only have 25 students. But I feel it's enough. I feel like I'm not teaching too much and not teaching too little. And I do have time to spend 1 second, sending them a little emoji or responding to a question. Or we do often have some contact during the week. And I find that that is okay. It's manageable for me, but that also increases rapport. Okay, so now we've come to the end of our fourth section. So we've discussed first contact, policy, practice, ongoing communication, and now it's sort of time to have a few questions. And before we have a little summary and wrap up, so Beth, did you spot anything in the chat that I need to address?
Oh, I did. You have a very lively audience tonight. It's
Yay!
quite exciting. So, Andrea Wilson, going back to sort of lesson cancellations, we had a couple of questions about that. Andrea asks, how do you deal with emotional breakdowns of kids? Sorry, I can't come to the lesson because our hamster died, or I was bullied today at school. How do you deal with those types of situations?
That's a really tricky one. I guess this is where compassion would come in. If they are, I'm hoping that the parent would bring the child to the lesson because the lesson might make that child feel better. Usually a parent will give me the heads up and say, I'm just letting you know so-and-so is very upset today because the hamster died or they got bullied at school. I don't have many situations where the parent is saying we're not coming. And maybe that's because of the strict policy. The parents know there's no credits or makeup lessons. So that's a possibility. If they do arrive and they are up, when they do arrive and they're upset, the way I would deal with that is saying, now your mum did tell me that you're feeling quite sad today. Do you want to talk about it? And they'll either say yes or no. And usually there'll be no. And I'll say, okay, so let's do something fun. Do you want to do something fun? So I just acknowledge that I know, acknowledge that they're feeling sad, and ask them if they want to talk about it. That's what I would do.
And that also goes back to building a strong rapport with your students. So, yeah. Mallory's question about teachers missing lessons and the policy for that, I believe, was covered. Sherry had a question about raising her rate. Sherry Koschel. I'm sorry, Sherry. Her question is with the increase of fee because you have to start adding GST. I'm guessing that has to do with some type of sales tax. She's putting her fees at this term, but she's going to have to absorb the GST for the rest of this year. But then she's going to have to put up fees again for next year because of that GST. So if she's feeling a bit anxious, how would you calm her troubled nerves?
Yes, Sherry, that's very difficult. So the GST is you're right, Beth, goods and services tax, it's 10%. Once you go over a certain threshold of earning a certain amount, you now have to charge, you're obliged to charge an extra 10%, which goes to the government. So it costs everybody an extra 10%. It's very difficult. I think that it's important to give a notice period that this is going to happen. And it's just one of those things. Yes, by saying you're prepared to absorb it for the first term, that's very nice. But if you give enough notice, I don't think you really should have to absorb it. That is just a way of giving more notice, saying that you will absorb it. You're going to take a 10% pay cut for a term while everybody gets used to it. I think if you give the notice period and then start charging it, there's nothing you can do. And it comes down to the fees that you charge. And this, I don't really want it to be, this is not really a webinar about how much to charge and how to put up your fees by more than 10%. But the most important thing is communication. You may lose some students. There's no question. Some people just can't afford to pay 10% more for their lessons. It's very, very tough. And I don't have all the answers for that. I'm sorry, Sherry.
It is a tough one. Nicole asks, could you elaborate on how you decide who gets a practice scholarship or how those are given, and then do you advertise that? Someone else suggested further down in the thread, ooh, I could announce this at my recitals.
Yes, absolutely announce it. Absolutely. Every newsletter, they get a whole printout of what, so I have bronze, silver, and gold awards. So a bronze award is a 10% discount off the following term's invoice. And to get a bronze award, and I pretty much only give out bronze awards, you've got to be right on top of Tonara or on top of your notebook, or you have to be very diligent. You have to have a good practice routine, and you have to keep on top of your tasks, and you have to obviously be improving and practicing a lot. So to even get a practice scholarship, like a bronze award, is a really amazing thing. And I don't give out practice scholarships to everybody every term. I pick and choose. And sometimes I do it like if they're on the border as encouragement, but most of the time they have to really earn it. And I make a big deal. I say, guess what? You earned a practice scholarship for next term. The parents are delighted. A silver award is like really going over and above. You know, those students who just come every week brimming with enthusiasm saying, I tried this, I tried that. And they're clearly practicing a lot. And then the gold award is like, I've only ever given out 2 gold awards in 5 years of me doing this, when somebody is just so unbelievably over the top. I put it in the newsletter. Congratulations to the following students and parents who have received a bronze award or a silver award, because practice is a team effort. We got to acknowledge practice is a team effort. The parents and the way I come up with practice scholarships is because there was a time where a couple of families had their children were wanting to get into a private school, that they were wanting them to get a music scholarship to a private school so it would reduce their school fees, and they made their kids practice so much so they could try and be eligible for the music scholarship, and they improved so much. And I thought, oh yes, so if the parents think they're going to save money, they'll make the kids practice more. And so that's why I instigated the practice scholarships. Now, yes, it does mean I'm taking a 10 or 20% pay cut with some of those students some terms, but my job is more than 10 or 20% better as a result. So that is why I do it. That is why I like it.
Excellent point. Karen Boyce, way back at the beginning, asked if you had any automation for inquiries, if you had a form on your website that would link to the waiting list. Lots of questions about the waiting list. And then how do you feel about providing details on how long that wait might be on the waiting list, or providing alternate teacher recommendations and info?
Okay, yes. Well, I'll tell you a little secret. I don't have a long waiting list. I just make it seem like I've got a long waiting list. I just keep it in a document on my computer. There's no official automation. I don't believe this process can be automated because it's too personal. We need to have the communication with people who are inquiring about lessons. If we want to make sure we get just the right students and ask all the right questions, then it's very, very personal. So what we need to do is, but the questionnaire, the link to the questionnaire is probably the only automated part. And then those responses come through and I read them. But as for how it works, you know, people are often on the waiting list for a while and then they go and find another teacher and they don't tell you. So it is quite time consuming when people, when you have a waiting list, you're constantly having to manage it and keep on top of it. And if spots come up, then you decide who you're going to put in that spot. It is administratively time consuming.
Yeah. So that wait list is more of a tool for you to use as a stall tactic while you continue to vet.
That's exactly.
I think this was the last question that I saw, but I'll cruise through while you answer this. How do you handle collecting late fees or late payments?
Oh, that's so tough. That's really tricky. And it's the one thing you can't ask in the trial lesson. It's the one piece of information you cannot gather. You can't say, okay, now I'd just like to ask you, what sort of payer are you? Are you on time? Are you late? Well, I need to remind you, you can't ask that. You won't find that out until the first time you send that invoice. And I find that very stressful. I find it so stressful when I have to follow up payments. And I'm not talking about people who are apologetic and let me know and say, I'm so sorry, the fees are coming next week. I'm talking about the people who just ignore the invoices, the people who just conveniently forget to pay. I see it as a form of disrespect and I find it very, very stressful. And I have to say, you know, it would really affect whether I have that student in my studio long term. It really does affect me. It may not affect you as much as it affects me, but I prefer to offer an incentive for paying early rather than have a late fee. I would prefer a discount for early payment rather than a fee for late payment. And I put things in my newsletter like prompt payment is really appreciated. I find it very stressful when I have to follow up with families. So paying on time is really, I thank you very much for prompt payment. And most of the families do. The families that don't even read that, it's very difficult to make them feel guilty about it. It is just so hard. So, but yeah, I don't charge a late fee. I, I, I am lucky. I don't have a lot of parents like that.
Excellent. And then, oh, lost it. A question for Sam from Joan. What would be some key flags for you? You know, red flags is the meme now. From your interview or first lesson that would cause you possibly to decline a student? And how often does this happen for you?
That is such a good question. It doesn't happen very often because I find that the email contact beforehand, I can, and the questionnaire helps me find out a lot of information. So if we get to the trial lesson, it usually means that I think they're probably a good fit. But the red flags for me would be if it's an unsupportive parent, or a parent that is just constantly interrupting, or a parent that I feel that maybe won't defer to my knowledge, that I'm going to be constantly clashing up against the parent with their high expectations. So that would be the red flag. The red flag, there's hardly ever, it doesn't matter what the student is like. If this doesn't matter whether the student seems to be incredibly capable or incredibly not capable, or has any sort of learning needs, I can cope with anything as long as the parent is supportive. So for me, that's the key.
Excellent, excellent. How do you deal with students who terminate the last lesson of the month or the last lesson of the term without giving notice?
Oh yes, the notice period for discontinuation. That is something that I do put in the newsletter as well. I say just a reminder now, music education is very dear to my heart, and I always find it very hard if someone decides to discontinue lessons. But if this is the case, it is very important that you let me know at least 4 weeks before the end of the term. So, and for when they sometimes, I mean, if they let me know in the last lesson, it's outrageous for your timetable. Or sometimes they let you know just before they come back for the first lesson. So a couple of times it has happened where I've said, look, but there is a notice period. So I say, well, look, you may as well come for the next term because the term fee still applies according to the notice period. So you may as well come for the extra term, instead of stopping in term 2, stop in term 3. And so I've had maybe 2 situations where the parent has gone, oh, okay, all right, yes, and they've agreed to it. The rest of the time, I've had many situations where they just say, no, we're not coming back, and there's kind of a bit of argy-bargy, which is Australian for a bit of pushback, bit of arguing, not like as polite as I can be, but there was this one, I mean, I don't want to end this on a negative note, but there was this, you'll all be horrified at this, there was one parent where I was trying so hard to say, look, she was cancelling just before school went back, and I was saying to her, look, this is really difficult for me because I needed some notice to be able to fill this spot. So, and I even offered a compromise of how to that I could I said, look, how about we settle on half the term's invoice? But she was just like, no, I don't think that's reasonable. And then she said, look, I understand you've got your policies and everything, but at the end of the day, it's piano lessons. And oh my gosh, it was over the phone, so she didn't see my face, and I did not know what to say. She was a lawyer, you see. Now, if I'd have tried to, I'm sure she would have been very happy to bill me for all her terms and conditions, but that was terrible. That was just terrible, and I did not know what to say. And in the end, I missed out on that money. Like, she didn't acknowledge the notice period. I didn't get any further funds out of her, and these things happen. These things happen. Is all
And when they do happen, isn't it that moment where you're like, you know what? If someone is saying it's just piano lessons, maybe we're well rid of that parent. It's always sad because we lose that student and we've developed that relationship with them. But if there's not that respect from the parent, then maybe we're
That's right.
well better off without them. So,
Oh,
trying to put a positive silver lining on that one.
yeah.
She didn't sound very pleasant at all to work with.
No, it was a real shame. I really liked the kids too. It was 2 kids. I really liked them. Okay, but let's end on a positive note. Now, I really feel that the links to the blog posts that we're going to send you will answer so many more questions. And I encourage you to make a copy of that questionnaire and edit it to your heart's content and use it to send out to prospective new students, because it's a wonderful way to find out the type of student and parent you're going to have in your home. But I would like to finish with Christine's feedback. She wrote, just generally like to hear everyone's issues and learn from this. And I thought, that's beautiful, because that's what we're all doing. That's what I'm doing. I'm always wanting to learn from other people's experiences, and for us to just all be here together on this webinar and hear about what happens to other people and read what happens in the chat, that is what it's all about. We are not alone. We're all in this together. We're all dealing with the same issues day in, day out. But that's the beauty of professional development. So thank you all so much for taking time out of your Friday morning or Thursday evening to be on the webinar. And if you are watching the replay, I hope you have found it very, very useful as well. We'll sign off now and see you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.